Okay, maintenance questions on the 650 FA. The maintenance questions start with, you can think of powders, petrol, oil, water, electrics, rubber, but we'll just go through the questions. As far as it goes with the electrics, so if that's how you'll check your dip beam and main beam, you'll switch your ignition on, hand in front of the light, and watch it rise and fall between dipped and main. And the blue light comes on, make sure your two side lights are working at the front. And then around the back, what we're looking for is the rear light to light up at the back. And of course, what you're trying to check is the number plate light. Make sure that's lit up and your reflector is also clean at the back. So if they're all working correctly, then you can move on from that question. Next one would be to check that your horn's working. And then left and right signals would be left signal, check both front and rear. Right indicator, check both front and rear. If they ask you how you would check that your brake lights are working, we want to make sure that we hold our hand in front of the rear light, press the rear brake and press the front brake. Okay, both separate switches, make sure that they're both working correctly. If they ask you how you'll check that your headstock has sufficient wear and it is okay for road use, you would say that you'll stand the bike up, hold the front brake, and you want to be able to move the bar from left to right. And you could also rock the bike, make sure there's no free play in the headstock. Okay, ignition off. If they ask you to check for cables, make sure all your cables are all in the proper stays. Make sure they're all well lubricated, including the clutch one. And then what you'll try and make sure as well is they're all in the proper stays and all their proper bracketries. So that's going to be your cables. Another one that they might ask you to check is how you check your oil. You would say you have the bike upright. You would say you would undo the main dipstick, wipe it clean, put it back in, take it out, make sure it's between the minimum maximum marks. Your engine coolant level is just here, between the minimum max mark is where the level should be. And if they ask you where to find recommended oils and fluids, you'll find them in your manual. If they ask you how often would you check them, you'll say you'll check them every time you ride. And would you need to be hot or cold? It needs to be cold. Okay, if they ask you to explain the use of kill switch, now kill switch just here, what you're looking to find is with the kill switch, that actually all it does, it kills the engine, but keeps the electrics live. But what it is that you might use it in a case of a fall, if you was to fall off in an accident, or if main mechanical failure, usually the throttle cable binding or sticking open. So it will kill the engine, but keep electrics live so that everything will still operate. Okay, so actually electrics will still operate, so you can be seen with the horn and indicators and lights. If that's how you check your suspension, what you would say is you'll look down here, make sure there's no broken cables, not broken cables, so broken springs. Make sure the damper is not weeping and there's no heavy misting, and then you'll check that for the front as well. So front suspension leg should have no heavy misting, and this one's nice and clean. So any heavy misting would usually mean there's no dampage with the suspension. So this thing's all good. So you check that. Actually, I check for your chain is correctly adjusted, and you make sure that no excessive play, and also you'll check the condition of your sprocket. So what I find is that you've got the main bolt here that you would slacken off the main bolt, adjust the tension as even, so that then your actual chain and front and rear sprockets are aligned. When you do finish, once you make sure there's no more than 30mm, it says here on play, what you'll do is you'll say that the chain should have no more than an inch of play either way, so that's for slackness. And then you'll say you would retighten the main bolt, and that should make it so that of course nothing will move. Okay, if actually you check for brake fluid levels, when you look for brake fluid levels, you're looking at your front here, front brake, to make sure that the level is between upper and lower. And then on the rear, you've got another reservoir here to make sure it's between the upper and lower, or minimum maximum. Recommended oils found in the handbook, and should be, when you do all these checks, should be cold. And if they ask you how often you'll do it, just say every time you ride. Okay, so if the SUI check your brakes are also actually okay, other than the brake fluid levels, you would inspect that the disc should have no heavy scoring. And down the caliper, you're looking between the caliper and the pad, on the disc, to make sure that there is sufficient, wear, that they're not excessively worn. So make sure there's enough material on your pads. And let's go through a couple of others. I think that's all the ones that they'll ask you, other than the passenger questions, which we'll try and do with this one. So if you're actually having a pillion, they might ask you what adjustments would you make while carrying a pillion, allowing for the extra weight. So you'd explain that you might lower your front headlight because of the extra weight on the back. If they ask you how you would check that you have other adjustments, other adjustments would be to tighten the main suspension at the back. So you might tighten the rear spring. You might check the chain for adjustment. You may have to slacken the chain. So that's adjustments that you might make for allowing extra weight of the pillion. If they ask you how would you ride differently of allowing for the extra weight, except that it would take more longer stops, and you should respect the throttle when you pick up your speed as well. Also, when cornering, allow for extra weight. And when you're at low speed, you might find that actually at lower speed that the bike becomes heavier. So you would actually allow yourself more time for gradual stops, but also how you might come to the situation where you're at low speed that the bike becomes more unstable and heavier. So you might allow for them contingencies of lower control with extra weight. Okay, so that's that. The other one would be, what advice would you give a pillion? First of all, make sure they're in the proper clothing, like proper approved helmet. Make sure it's done up for them. Make sure that they have a proper jacket, trouser, boot and gloves. Make sure that you show them where to hold on. So you'll show them that you'd hold on to the rider or the grab rails that are on the back and the strap. Show them where to put their feet, which will be on the foot pegs. So you make sure they put their feet on the pegs. Tell them only to get on and off the bike when they're told to, and no arm signals. Okay, so they're the 3 questions you might be asked. And that's all the 650. So next is the 500 we'll run through. Tyres both front and rear should be to the tread, with no cuts or bulges. Recommended tyre pressure you might find in the manual or on the internet, but avoid the ones on the side of the tyre because they're not always correct, because they're usually the maximum pressure. Should be no cuts and bulges, no canvas, and basically with the wear, you just want to make sure this displaces the water, but it needs to be above 1 millimetre of tread.